What's up, everybody? Welcome back to R&B Hives. If you're new here, this is the channel where we dig into the real stories behind the music you grew up on. The deals, the fallouts, the moments that never made it into the liner notes. Today's story is a big one, so make sure you're sitting comfortably. Berry Gordy built the biggest black-owned business in the history of American music. Detroit sound, family energy, a hit factory that turned teenagers off the street into the most famous voices in the world. But here's the thing about a factory that good. Eventually, the people who built it start to wonder what they'd sound like on their own. So today we're doing something a little different. 12 artists. 12 moments where somebody walked out of Hitsville, USA and landed somewhere else, and came back swinging with a hit that Motown never saw coming. Grab something to drink, get comfortable, and let's get into it. 12. Freda Payne, Band of Gold, Invictus, 1970. We're starting with the story behind the story, because before there's a song, there's a breakup. In 1967, Motown's most valuable songwriting team just left. Brian Holland, Lamont Dozier, and Eddie Holland, the guys who wrote Stop in the Name of Love, Reach Out I'll Be There, Baby Love, walked away over a fight about royalties. And Berry Gordy didn't just let them go quietly. He sued them and got a court order that basically banned them from writing or producing for anybody else while the case played out. So for 2 years, Holland sat in legal limbo, building their own labels in Detroit, Invictus and Hot Wax, just waiting for the injunction to lift. When it finally did in 1970, they brought in a singer named Freda Payne, who by her own account wasn't even sold on the song they gave her. She thought it wasn't right for where she was in her career. The producer's response, more or less, was, "You don't have to love it, just sing it." They ended up piecing the vocal together from dozens of takes. And because Holland Dozier Holland were still legally radioactive, they had to credit the song to a fake name, Edith Wayne, just to get it released. Band of Gold went to number 3 on the pop charts, number 1 in the UK, and went gold. The backing vocalists later formed Tony Orlando and Dawn. The guitar was played by a session player barely out of his teens named Ray Parker Jr. A song that couldn't even carry its real writers' names became one of the biggest records of the year. That's how we're opening this list. 11. Brenda Holloway, You've Made Me So Very Happy, as covered by Blood, Sweat and Tears, Columbia, 1969. This one's a little different from the rest of the list, because the artist who left Motown isn't the one who scored the massive hit. But it might be the clearest example on this whole countdown of exactly what the intro promised you. A rival label using Motown talent to outcompete Motown itself. Brenda Holloway signed with Motown in 1964 as a teenager, and she had real success. Every Little Bit Hurts became a hit that same year, and she was popular enough to land a spot on the Beatles' 1965 US tour. But like a lot of artists on this list, she watched the label's resources get funneled toward its biggest stars while she waited her turn. By 1968, worn down by years of being an afterthought behind acts like the Supremes, she left Motown for good. I lost that love before. Here's the twist. Before she left, she'd co-written a song with her sister Patrice Holloway and producer Frank Wilson called You've Made Me So Very Happy. Motown put out her original version in 1967, and it did fine. Decent, not huge. Then, in 1969, a jazz rock band on Columbia Records called Blood, Sweat and Tears got a hold of it. Their version exploded. It climbed all the way to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, became one of the defining crossover hits of the year, and ended up on an album that won the Grammy for Album of the Year. A song written by a Motown artist who'd already walked out the door, became a much bigger hit for a completely different label, in a completely different genre, without Motown seeing a dime of the artist royalties that would have come from having her under contract when it blew up. That's the whole theme of this list in miniature. Motown built the talent, and somebody else cashed the check. 10. The Spinners, I'll Be Around. Atlantic, 1972. For almost 10 years, the Spinners were basically an afterthought at Motown. Parked on the label's secondary imprint, handed whatever material was left over, never quite a priority. Stevie Wonder actually took pity on them at one point and produced It's a Shame for Them in 1970, which cracked the top 15. Didn't matter. They were still stuck at the back of the line. Then their contract came up for renewal, and Aretha Franklin, who was already a massive star over at Atlantic, told them straight up, "Come with me." So they did. Atlantic paired them with producer Tom Bell, one of the architects of the Philadelphia soul sound. At their very first session, Bell handed them a song he'd co-written called I'll Be Around. And it wasn't even supposed to be the single. It was the B-side. Radio DJs flipped the record over on their own, fell for it, and Atlantic had no choice but to make it the official release. It hit #1 R&B, #3 pop, the Spinners' first million-selling single after almost a decade of being Motown's lowest priority act. 9 years at Hitsville, 1 flipped record at Atlantic. That's the whole story. 9. Gladys Knight and the Pips, Midnight Train to Georgia, Buddha, 1973. Gladys Knight later wrote that at Motown, the Pips felt like they were always working off everybody else's leftovers. Diana Ross, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, they got the songwriters, the promotion, the spotlight. Gladys Knight and the Pips got what was left over. There's even a story about a 1968 tour where Diana Ross reportedly had the Pips pulled as the Supremes' opening act because they were too good and were upstaging the headliner. By 1973, they were done. They signed with Buddha Records, partly because Motown's big move from Detroit to Los Angeles was already pulling apart the creative relationships that had actually worked for years. Almost immediately, songwriter Jim Weatherly showed up with a batch of new songs. One of them was originally called Midnight Plane to Houston. Gladys didn't love it. Too country, too specific to somebody else's life. So they reworked it. The plane became a train. Houston became Georgia, Gladys's actual home state. Midnight Train to Georgia became the group's only #1 pop hit in their entire history. 2 weeks at #1, topped the R&B chart too, and won them a Grammy the following year. Motown had them for 7 years and never gave them anything close to that. Buddha gave it to them within their first 12 months. 8. Eddie Kendricks, Keep On Truckin', Tamla, 1973. Now here's the twist. This one's not really about leaving Motown. This is about leaving a group and staying at the label, and it gets nasty. Eddie Kendricks left the Temptations, the group he co-founded, in 1971, after things came to a head backstage at the Copacabana. He signed a solo deal with Motown's own Tamla imprint, but Norman Whitfield, still running the show as the Temptations producer, wasn't having it. Whitfield wrote a song called Superstar, Remember How You Got Where You Are, that was basically a direct shot at Kendricks, a warning to the guy who thought he could walk away from the biggest vocal group in R&B. For 2 years, Kendricks' solo career went nowhere, while the Temptations kept scoring hits without him. Then in 1973, everything flipped. A session built around an early disco groove, with Kendricks' falsetto floating over the top of it, turned into Keep On Truckin', a #1 on both the pop and R&B charts at the same time. Gold record, somewhere around 3 million copies sold. Some critics have since called it one of the first true #1 disco records, period. And if you listen close, there's a lyric in there that reads like Kendrick's quietly firing back at his old group. He followed it with Boogie Down, another huge hit, and then ran off 9 straight R&B top 10 singles. The guy the Temptations told to remember how he got where he was ended up helping define where the entire genre was going next. 7. The Four Tops. Ain't No Woman Like the One I've Got. ABC, Dunhill, 1973. When Motown announced in 1972 that it was moving everything from Detroit to Los Angeles, the Four Tops made a decision fast. They were Detroit, and they weren't going anywhere. So they left the label they'd called home since 1963 and signed with ABC Dunhill, who paired them with songwriters Dennis Lambert and Brian Potter. The sound they built was smoother, more polished than the Funk Brothers-driven records the Tops made at Motown, but it was still anchored by Levi Stubbs' gospel-trained voice, and you could tell it was still them. Ain't No Woman Like the One I've Got came out in January 1973 and hit #4 pop, #2 R&B, #1 on the Cashbox chart, went gold. It was their best pop performance since 1967, meaning one album at a new label undid 5 years of decline at the old one. Group member Duke Fakir later wrote about how a Motown executive told them they were being let go. Cold, matter of fact, like he was throwing out the trash, in Fakir's words. The Four Tops stayed together as a group for another 30 years after that. Make of that what you will. 6. Honeycomb, Want Ads, Hot Wax, 1971. Remember Holland Dozier Holland from story number 12? They didn't build one label after leaving Motown. They built 2, running side by side. Invictus had Frida Payne as the flagship act. The sister label, Hot Wax, had a trio called Honeycomb. Carolyn Willis, Edna Wright, and Shelley Clark. All 3 had backgrounds as session and backup singers for some of the biggest names in the business before they teamed up. Want Ads was written by Greg Perry, General Johnson, and Barney Perkins. Produced under HDH's post-injunction sound. Still built on that Motown foundation, but funkier, a little rawer, a little more independent. It's about a woman literally placing a classified ad for a new man, treating dating like a job listing. Sharp, funny, undeniable. It went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May of 1971, the first pop #1 Holland Dozier Holland had produced since walking out of Motown 4 years earlier. And here's the detail that says it all. Their first #1 after leaving didn't come from Invictus, the label literally named after the word for unconquered. It came from the sister label, with a group most casual listeners had never heard of. They left because Gordy wouldn't pay them what they were worth. Then they built something from scratch and got every dollar of it themselves. 5. The Jacksons, Enjoy Yourself, Epic, 1976. The Jackson 5 signed with Motown in 1969 and became the label's biggest new phenomenon in years. 4 straight #1 singles right out of the gate. But by the mid-70s, the brothers wanted something Motown had never really given any of its artists: the freedom to write and produce their own material. In 1975, they left for Epic. Motown, furious, refused to give up the rights to the name Jackson 5. They owned the trademark. So the brothers rebranded simply as the Jacksons. Jermaine, married to Berry Gordy's daughter at the time, stayed behind with Motown. Younger brother Randy stepped into the group. Epic gave them what Motown never had: full creative control. Their 1976 debut, produced by Gamble and Huff, opened with Enjoy Yourself, a sleek, disco-tinged track that hit number 6 pop and number 2 R&B, their first pop top 10 in 3 years. But honestly, that song is almost beside the point. The real story plays out over the next decade. Michael Jackson, now a solo artist on that same epic label, released Off the Wall in 1979, then Thriller in 1982, which remains the best-selling album of all time. Everything that made Michael Jackson the biggest artist in the history of music happened after Motown. Epic didn't just pick up a former Motown act. They ended up with the king of pop. 4. Marvin Gaye, Sexual Healing, CBS, 1982. By 1981, Marvin Gaye was living as a tax exile in Europe, buried in debt to the IRS and to his ex-wife, who happened to be Berry Gordy's sister. He was staying in a small apartment in Ostend, Belgium, put up by a local promoter who'd basically taken him in when his life was falling apart. He'd been at Motown for over 2 decades, fought Gordy for creative control, gone on strike at one point, been handed one of the biggest contracts in the label's history after What's Going On, and then watched everything outside the music come apart at the seams. An executive from CBS flew out to Europe and convinced Gaye to sign. In March of 1982, Motown and CBS negotiated his release, reportedly for somewhere around $1.5 million. Gaye went into a studio in Belgium, then Germany, and in the middle of all that exile recorded Sexual Healing, one of the most successful records of his career. It spent 10 straight weeks atop the R&B chart, the longest run at number 1 that chart had ever seen up to that point, crossed over to number 3 pop, and won him his first 2 Grammy Awards. After 21 years at Motown, after What's Going On and Let's Get It On, albums that are in every conversation about the greatest records ever made, Marvin Gaye's first Grammys came from a song recorded in someone else's apartment, in a country that wasn't his own. He passed away less than 2 years later, but he got that Grammy first. 3. Diana Ross, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? RCA, 1981. Diana Ross was the face of Motown for over 20 years, from the Supremes, straight through a solo run that carried the label through some of its biggest years commercially. Berry Gordy built a huge part of his empire around her, and at the end of 1980, when her contract wrapped up, her exit settlement from Motown came out to $250,000 for 2 decades of stardom. RCA came to her with a 7-year deal, reportedly worth $20 million, full production control over her own records. She's said to have asked Gordy directly if he could match it. He told her it wasn't possible. She signed with RCA in May of 1981, and at the time, it was the richest recording contract in music industry history. Her first RCA album, named after her cover of Why Do Fools Fall in Love, sold over 1 million copies and gave her a top 10 hit with the title track, plus another with Mirror Mirror. 20 years of stardom for $250,000 versus $20 million on her own terms. That's not really a story about a song. That's a story about what she was actually worth. 2. Tina Marie, Behind the Groove, Epic, 1980 to 81. Not every departure story is about a hit record. Some of them changed the industry itself, and this one might be the most important entry on this whole list. Tina Marie signed with Motown as a teenager in the mid-70s, largely under the mentorship of Rick James, and put out a run of records through the label, Wild and Peaceful, Lady T, Irons in the Fire, that built her a real following, especially in the R&B and dance world, even without much promotional push behind her. When her contract came up, Motown wanted to keep her locked into terms she felt were unfair, without actually putting new music out. So she did something almost nobody had tried before. She sued them. The case became known as the Motown/Tina Marie case. and it led to a change in California law that's still referenced today, often called the Tina Marie Law. The short version: a record label can't use an artist's contract to keep them tied up and silent indefinitely if the label itself isn't releasing new material or paying them. If they're not going to use you, they can't sit on you either. She won, signed with Epic, and released tracks like Behind the Groove and I Need Your Lovin' that became foundational to the boogie and early dance funk sound going into the 80s. Records that are still sampled and referenced constantly in R&B and hip-hop today. Tina Marie didn't just leave Motown for a better deal. She left and rewrote the rules for every artist who came after her. 1. Mary Wells, Ain't It the Truth, 20th Century Fox, 1964. And this brings us to number 1, because to really understand the whole idea of an artist leaving Motown, you have to go back to the very first one who ever did it, at the worst possible time to do it. Mary Wells wasn't just an early Motown star. She was, by most accounts, Motown's first real star, period. The label's biggest name before the Supremes, before the Temptations were household names, before almost anybody. My Guy, written and produced by Smokey Robinson, hit number 1 on the pop charts in the spring of 1964. She was on tour with the Beatles that same year, at their personal request. And then, right at the absolute peak of all that, at only 21 years old, she walked away from Motown entirely, turning down a reported renewal offer to sign with 20th Century Fox for what was, at the time, a much bigger contract. It didn't work out the way anybody expected. Without Smokey Robinson writing for her, without the Funk Brothers behind her, without the machine that had built My Guy in the first place, her run at 20th Century Fox never came close to what she'd had at Motown. She moved between a few more labels over the years, still recording, still respected, but never again at that level. So why is this number 1 on a list about artists who found success after leaving? Because Mary Wells' story is the flip side of every single story we just told you. She's proof of exactly how much the Motown machine actually mattered. The writers, the musicians, the promotion, all of it working together. Every artist on this list who thrived after leaving found another machine just as strong to plug into. Mary Wells left the biggest machine in the business at its absolute peak, and there wasn't another one waiting for her on the other side. 12 stories. 11 of them prove that Motown's artists could walk out that door and build something just as big, sometimes bigger, somewhere else. The 12th one, the first one really, is the reminder of exactly what made Motown Motown in the first place.